Rosario Dawson is an actor, activist, and co-founder and chairwoman of Voto Latino. She continually speaks on a number of social justice issues, including policing, civic engagement, the environment, and serves on various boards, including the Lower East Side Girls Club and V-Day. She also recently co-founded Studio 189, and social enterprise dedicated to empowering African entrepreneurs. She's kind of amazing, right? Please welcome Rosario Dawson.
Thank you very much. So grateful for all of you being here today. I'm incredibly humbled and honored to be here myself. This is my first time meeting Sabrina Fulton and Dr. Ross, whom I have actually worked with through my voting organization, Voto Latino, now for several years, and we're continuing to expand that work. We started late, and there's a lot of people listening in the other room, so I just want to get started. Dr. Robert K. Ross is President and Chief Executive Officer for the California Endowment, one of the most potent and effective health foundations working in California. Dr. Ross has an extensive background as a health philanthropist, a public health administrator, and as a pediatrician. Dr. Ross is a member of the President's Advisory Commission on Educational Excellence for African Americans, co-chairs the Diversity and Philanthropy Coalition, co-chair of the Executives Alliance to expand opportunities for boys and young men of color, and serves on many boards and holds many honors. We are honored to have him join us today. Sabrina Fulton is the mother of Trayvon Martin and the founder of the Trayvon Martin Foundation. She is an impassioned activist and has dedicated her life to transforming family tragedy into social change. Sabrina is a role model for many, and even in the most difficult circumstances has turned her grief into advocacy, speaking against violence towards children and the need to build better, safer, and healthier communities. We are honored and grateful to have her here tonight. Please help me welcome Sabrina Fulton. First of all, let me again express for us all today the sorrow and pain that we all feel for your loss. No one should ever have to bury their child, especially under those circumstances. And at the same time, we then applaud you because of your courage and resilience and activism in the face of such violence to change the dynamics in our society that led to his tragic, unjust death. And we look forward to learning from you today to make ourselves stronger. Dr. Ross, you have tremendous insight into the broader impact on communities across California that experience violence, discrimination, and lack of access to resources. Now, these forms of trauma pelted on people daily require solutions to maintain resilience, look forward, and more importantly, thrive rather than just survive. We're gonna have a conversation among ourselves and then we'll answer a few questions. Sabrina, you've said that your son was murdered because of racial profiling and that we must address racial profiling. You established the Trayvon Martin Foundation, which has a goal of tackling this problem through schools in particular. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
When this first happened, I was one of the people, like most of you all, did not want to believe that it was because of racial profiling. I was one of those people that listened to the media and thought that it was about his hoodie. I've learned a lot since then. One of the things that I learned is that everybody wears that hoodie. All nationalities wear that hoodie, all races, men, women, girls, boys, everybody just loves that hoodie. And so I thought at one point that it had a lot to do with the fact that he had on a hoodie, but it's not. And I need to tell you that I need to be true and honest with myself, just as other people need to be true and honest with themselves and realize that it was absolutely about the color of his skin. As an American citizen, I believed in the justice system, and I believed that we would get justice. I believed that or I wanted to believe that we had come much further than we had. I didn't really want to believe that America still had people living here in our communities that will shoot someone because of the color of their skin. It was hard for me to believe that. It was hard for me to just have that on my mind. I didn't want to believe that we were a society like that. I wanted to believe that we were much more civilized than that. And so it took me a minute, and I'm being honest 100%, and that's the only thing that I can be, is to listen and to take back. Because I believed it was the hoodie. I believed that he was walking down the street and because he had this hoodie on, because that's something the media put a smoke screen up and made us believe that it was because of the hoodie. It wasn't. It wasn't. They were absolutely the person. The Neighborhood Crime Watch was looking for an African American. Guess what? He picked one. And just like he picked Trayvon, it could have been somebody else's son that he picked. And I had to come to realization about that. And I had to be honest with myself about that. And I had to know that we are still living in a society that looks at the color of one's skin. And that's considered racial profiling. When somebody singles you out because of the color of your skin, you are being racially profiled. And so I think what has happened is it has brought a lot of awareness. I speak through a speakers bureau. It's bringing awareness to our young people, to our older people. It's bringing awareness. Because one of the things, let me just mention, is that if you are riding down the street and you will pull your car over to help an animal that's being injured before you'll help another human being, then I'm speaking to you. I'm speaking to you. Because it's about awareness and it's about admitting when we have a problem. Collectively, we have a problem that we need to fix. And so it's time out for us pretending like we don't have an issue. We absolutely have an issue. The issue is not always about black and white. Sometimes the issue is about black on black and white on white. So what we need to address is the right and the wrong. So what we do is we have programs through the Trayvon Martin Foundation where we mentor kids, and we just had 75 kids in March to come to the Trayvon Martin Foundation in Miami. And what we talked about was the impact of social media. We talked about self-esteem and goal setting. We talked about just real life issues that those young people are addressing when it comes to the way they dress, when it comes to their appearance and how they act and their attitude. And so we wanted to try to make our impact on our community. And that's what it takes. Collectively, it takes everybody just doing their part.
Thank you very much for doing your part. You know, I think the world would forgive you if you had decided not to. And the fact that you did, and you are, is profound. And I thank you. And it's because of people like you that Prop 47 passed in California. So we could stop penalizing young people who are going and getting incarcerated at crazy rates for what really should have always been classified as misdemeanors. So that we could stop spending so much money on incarcerating young people in our private prison systems that people benefit financially from, and start actually putting that money into educating our young people. As one of our local organizations here, the Homeboy Industries, it's jobs, not jails. So education is very key to that. So thank you for stepping up in that way. Something about what you said, talking about racial profiling and the realities around that. Coming as a New Yorker, you know, we've made a huge pushback against the stop and frisk program in New York. 85% of the time they were targeting Blacks and Latinos, and 9 out of 10 searches came up with nothing. So you just think about the atmosphere of fear and hate that breeds, and contempt, which then only further makes it that thing where you're going, I hope someone calls for help when I'm hurt or stops to help. But it makes us so afraid to reach out. One of the things that I saw, I mentioned earlier, there's a great organization in New York that I'm fond of called the Brotherhood Sister Soul Project. And they created a PSA called The Talk. And in it, they have young Black men who are being spoken to by their parents. And their parents are telling them, hey, if you see a police officer, make sure to show your hands, don't make any sudden movements, always be respectful even if they're not. And then at the very end of the PSA, there's a white father talking to his son as he's leaving. And he says, hey, have fun, and if you get into any trouble, call the police, they're there to help. And it just shows the disparity between our communities. So I want to talk to you, that leads me a little bit to you, Dr. Ross. With Voto Latino, we created a campaign called United We Win to bring together communities of color on issues that affect us, such as criminal justice. Similarly, the California Endowment has been tackling issues confronting young boys and men of color through the Sons and Brothers Initiative, which I'm very fond of. Can you tell us some more on why bringing together communities of colors is very important?
Yeah, first of all, thank you. I'm humbled to be here with these two incredible women. And I want to come back to Ms. Fulton's leadership for a minute, because just her being here makes a point that I want to make sure we get to about resiliency.
Yes.
And in your leadership, Rosario, it's just so refreshing after TMZ and the reality shows and all the nonsense that we see out of the entertainment world, to see you carrying the mantle of social justice and balancing whatever you have to do to please Hollywood. So thank you for your leadership there. Yeah, so we're a health foundation, and so we co-sponsored this Manifest Justice event with our colleagues from Amnesty International, and Stephen Hawkins. Where are you, Stephen? Thank you, Stephen, for your leadership at Amnesty International. This was a bit of a stretch for us because we typically think of health as a health foundation and young people. We think of clinics and school-based clinics and health services and that kind of thing. But we've been on a Building Healthy campaign tour where we're engaging young people and grassroots organizations like Brotherhood Sister Soul, except here in California. And what we've tried to do is be better at listening to the voice of young people. Mm-hmm. Right? So I'm going to riff off of your Brotherhood Sister Soul to make a point. I was there visiting Brotherhood Sister Soul about 2 summers ago in Harlem, and was talking to the young people there and their great executive director, Kari. And what he was telling me about was how they reached young people and engaged young people who have been traumatized, marginalized, stigmatized, oppressed. Right? And one of the ways that people that are working with young people reach and engage young people is through the arts, right? And the power of storytelling. And he actually showed me a poem that a young woman had written, African-American woman had written. And it was the poem, as I read it, was about a young woman who was sexually abused by her father. In a very graphic, very real language, you could feel the power of what she had to deal with, right? And so that young woman, I asked Carrie afterwards, I said, what happened to her? This is really a terrible story. And she said, well, she's one of our young leaders, and she's now mentoring other young people, right? And so in that snapshot, it gives you a sense of both the horror and the tragedy of oppression and adversity. Young people in this country, particularly young people of color, male and female, are dealing with a lot of adversity and a lot of trauma. It not only affects their health in the wellness in the moment and their behavior, but the science tells us it affects their health even 20 and 30 years later, right? So you can track obesity, alcohol abuse, drug abuse, prison time, depression, back to adversity in childhood. There's a strong dose-response relationship, right? And so the science about trauma and oppression and what it does to people is very clear what it does to your brain. It actually does things, I'm not going to get into that, but it does things to the neurophysiological pathways in your brain, right? What's less well understood is resiliency. And resiliency is sort of trauma turned inside out. And what happens with resiliency is young people in particular, the Sabrina Fultons of the world, the Nelson Mandelas of the world, the Cesar Chavez's of the world were all exposed to trauma. They were dealing with oppression firsthand, right? And a very tragic misfortune in the case of Sabrina Fulton and her son, right? And here she is as a leader and activist for social change and justice, right? And so for too much of America, trauma and oppression breaks us down, but there's this resiliency thing where actually it fuels leadership, right? So another example is Mothers Against Drunk Driving, where policies and laws, how many lives have been changed from the leadership of Mothers Against Drunk Driving, right? It used to be okay 20 years ago to drink and get in your car and drive. It's not okay now, right? And so with young people, what we've seen is their anger, their frustration, how much the trauma and oppression and marginalization, stigmatization, the race affects them. But if they're connected to one another and engaged, and given the kinds of supports that a community coalition, that a Brotherhood Crusade, that a Sisterhood, Brother and Sister Soul can provide, not only can it have a therapeutic effect, it can have a transformative effect, and they can become social justice leaders, right? And so for us, it's sober. The reality of trauma and oppression and racism, and we get people, it's sobering. But at the same time, if you can get them connected and engaged, and the reason we did this particular, which is new for us, we never kind of dabbled in the arts. But what we're finding is the arts and culture and music is a way for these young people to engage in a meaningful way that absent that route, I'm not sure schools and healthcare systems would get that. That young girl who wrote that poem, I don't know that we in the healthcare system would have gotten that out of her, right? She had to be in a comfortable place where she was engaged around trusting people, tell that story, now she's a warrior for justice, right? So this is why a living example is Sabrina Fulton and your ability to, you get to resiliency different kinds of ways. Some people it's a spiritual thing, others it's through faith, others through it's art, music, but however way you need to get there, you get there. And so how many lives are going to be impacted because of how you transform that horrific tragedy into leadership and activism and engagement? And I wish at some point, she was telling me previously, Rosario, I hope you get a chance to talk about your circle of mothers. Because that feels very powerful as well, how you've been reaching out to mothers. And so I just want to say, thank you for your leadership and your demonstration of how to transform trauma through resiliency into real leadership.
I know Michael Skolnick was talking with you yesterday on the phone. I was speaking with him earlier today, amazing writer, activist, who works with Global Grind. We conferred together after, with Voto Latino after the while the Ferguson riots were going on. And we're really trying to bring communities together and talk about tackling these problems together as a group. I think resiliency is a really interesting word. I've been walking in marches since Al Sharpton still wore tracksuits. I think that requires, people, I didn't grow up with very much, but I grew up with tenacious parents. And we were willing to work for everything, including our rights. And one of the things that brings you brought up men and women and talking about brotherhood, sister, soul, and one of the things I'd like to talk about, because you also mentioned as well about needing across race and cross gender to be coming together and coalescing. And I think for this movement and what we're talking about here to truly have resilience, it does need and necessitate all of those groups coming together. So I wonder, I know I was looking at the Sons and Brothers program, and I know that you've been bringing up a lot. There's also now been this push for daughters and sisters. And there was a lot of pushback. I know Brothers and Sons was brought up and inspired by President Obama's Brothers Keeper initiative, which got a lot of pushback, actually, in a lot of ways, because it felt like for the president to finally really be addressing race, to then divide it by sex felt like an injustice, especially when you think of black women being incarcerated at 7 times the rate of white women. That this is clearly an issue that's affecting disproportionately all of our Black Lives Matter folks, but at the same time, all lives matter. In the past few months, there was a 17-year-old woman, young lady, Jessica Hernandez, who was killed, shot by police, unarmed, in Denver, Colorado. Antonio Zambrano Montes, who was 35, of Pasco, Washington, and 31-year-old Ruben Garcia, Villapando of Grapevine, Texas. And none of those deaths merited the same sort of media attention because they were Latino. And they're automatically looked at as immigrants. And there becomes there goes the other conversation that's happening that's not happening at Latino dinner tables. Why? Because the parents are ashamed that they're being looked at as non-members of society or undocumented, and they don't want to have that conversation with their children, and their children are looking at them going, I'm supposed to be the one to kind of be bridging the gap of where you're coming from as the first generation, but I'm not even looked like as an American, even though I'm born here and I only speak English. And so to have resiliency necessitates all of us doing our part, but then also working with each other. And I just want to say how grateful I am that we've been able to do that with Voto Latino. In January, Voto Latino was invited to testify before the President's Task Force on 21st Century Policing. Prior to testifying, we sent out a survey to our audience where we received over 430 responses within 24 hours. That might not seem like a lot, but that's really a big deal, considering this survey took 15 minutes to take. So people really took the time thoroughly to answer these questions and share about how they were feeling about issues like racial profiling. This response was unprecedented and proved just how much our communities, especially young people, want and need to be involved in this conversation. So I wonder, Sabrina, what have you learned from the young people that you've worked with through your foundation that we might also be able to use?
One of the things I learned how powerful social media is. That's definitely a plus. Before, when this first happened with my son, it was the colleges and the universities that were tweeting, that were on Facebook, that was on Instagram. It was them that actually started the movement. It wasn't the ABC, NBC, CNNs, and HLNs, and all the other ones. It was our young people, and it was our college-age students that actually got the movement started. And so that's one very important tool that we have that a lot of people don't take advantage of. If you want to get the word out fast, you post. And you post it fast, you post the time and the location and everything, and people will come out because that's just, they don't do the text messaging as much as they do social media. Social media is the bomb. So if you guys don't know how to use it, learn how to use it. I just, started using Instagram. I was familiar with Facebook for a few years. I resisted it for a while, and then I was like, oh, well, what is everybody talking about? Well, I see what everybody is talking about, And then the Twitter thing came along. I was like, no, I don't want to do that too. I don't have time. And so then I got with the Twitter program. So now it's Instagram. And so our young people are spreading the word so much faster. They don't do the flyers anymore. You guys are still with the flyers. They don't do the flyers anymore.
Mimeograph machines.
We had our first Million Hoodie rally in New York City at Union Square. We were actually there for the Politics Nation with Reverend Sharpton on MSNBC. And he told us, listen, in 2 days, less than 2 days, they got together a 1 million hoodie rally. And so we were asking, Tracy and I were asking the attorneys, like, what's the 1 million hoodie rally? You know, because we didn't know, you know, what's the 1 million hoodie rally? And, oh, people are just going to come out and show support for what happened to Trayvon. And we were like, that was the first time we seen a sign that people actually stood with us. And it's not just African Americans. We have to get past that. It's a lot of people that says, that's wrong. And they're standing with us. And they're standing for us. So don't get under the impression that this is just about black and white. As Rosario said, it's about all of us. And so that's one of the most important lessons I learned. I learned a lot about myself during this journey. I mean, I learned a lot about America. I learned a lot about our justice system and our government and how unfair our government is. I learned a lot about the police department and different attorneys. I learned a lot. But the most important lesson that I took away from this whole tragedy is don't wait until something happens to your child, and until something happens to your neighbor, your brother, your sister, your son, your daughter. Don't wait. If you don't learn anything else, take a look at those articles, take a look at those posts, feel for those families, and really say, I'm going to do something about this. I have to get involved. I have to do something. I have to do my part. Don't just ignore it, and then you're going to be on this side of the same side of the organization that I'm on. This is not a place for you. And so that is the most important lesson that I've learned, is to not wait. We have no time to wait, people. We have no time to wait. We have to do something about this crisis that we're in immediately.
I'm just discovering the email, Sabrina, so I'll catch up to Twitter at some point. But, you know, I'm old enough to, you know, I was raised, I wasn't old enough to participate in the civil rights movement, but I was raised to watch it, right? And so everything kind of we're seeing and hearing is the unfinished business, right? And feeling, quite frankly, a sense of incompleteness, my generation, that we didn't run a very good leg of our baton, right? How is it that my generation sat back and watched the incarceration superhighway get built and filled, right? So we're gonna need a couple of things. One is we're gonna need to come together. I think you made the point around the boy-girl divide. There are a number of divides that historically my generation has, you know, black folks over here, Latinos over there, women's rights over here somewhere, LGBT maybe, you know, we need to cut that out, right? We need to support one another's efforts. And certainly here in California, even here in LA, we've seen that. We saw that for those of you that were involved in the school suspensions battle, when young people said they're criminalizing us in school and they're kicking us out, and we needed to stop, and we saw black, white, Asian, brown, boys, girls, LGBT all coming together. And by the way, that activism, Rosario, led to 9 bills to reform school suspension policies in the state of California. The governor signed 5 of them. 2 years later, school suspensions are down 30% in the state of California. Young people led that battle. Okay? So coming together across boundaries, that's number one. Number two, and I'm so glad to hear you talk about Voto Latino. We really do need to vote, really. Okay? And so when I see the energy and the power of Black Lives Matter, of the Dreamers, I see the young people in Baltimore and Ferguson, and the anger and the frustration and the collectivism, and I can't help but ask myself, are you voting? Are you voting?
What was it, 6% of the population voted in Ferguson?
You know,
voted?
a researcher told me in the state of California, if you're between the ages of 18 and 20 in the state of California and you're a person of color, you are more likely to be arrested than have voted in the last election. Okay? We can't have that. I mean, the reason why we are sending people to jail hand over fist is because of the way Congress looks and how state legislators look. And if you want to stop spending $1 billion for a B-1 bomber and invest it in young people and communities and in neighborhoods instead, we got to change the way those places look. So thank you for your leadership on Voto Latino. And if we can marry this activism and this energy and this social media powerful platform with the right kind of civic engagement and voting, I think we'd really be seeing something.
As well as with your education initiatives, you know, it's going to take a well-rounded approach. You know, I like that you said about passing on the baton. Harry Belafonte says that very succinctly and very clearly, that he worked very, very hard, and then they didn't pass it on. And now, in his 80s, he's working really, really hard to coalesce communities and pass on his knowledge. And that's another thing. It requires intergenerational conversation. Again, we keep dividing ourselves around class, sexual orientation, poverty, classism, ageism, sexism. All of these things continue to divide us and make us not see how correlated all of these issues are and how impossible it is really to look at any of them without looking at the other. One of my great mentors is Eve Ensler. I'm on the board of V-Day. She wrote the Vagina Monologues and spearheaded the 1 Billion Rising campaign, which is now had its 3rd year. And it's accounting for the UN statistic that 1 in 3 women will be raped, killed, or beaten in her lifetime, which accounts for over 1 billion people on the planet. And one of the things that she talked about is turning your pain into power, which, Sabrina, I think you have done profoundly. Women aren't raping themselves, so men need to be a part of that conversation. And I'm just really grateful for the majority now. As you're saying, more and more people are coming up. They're using the social media, they're reaching out to each other, they're making their voices heard. And I'm so grateful for that, because that's really what's going to turn the tables. You know, when you're seeing the president talking about dreamers, that's because people who can't vote made so much noise he had to, calling him deporter-in-chief. When you see 20 million that's been put towards body cams for police officers, yes, that's a drop in the bucket, but it does push the needle forward. It does address an issue. It does start the conversation that needs to be had within all of the places that needs to be had, especially in our precincts. There's all of these spaces and places to go to feed out our anger and come together. But when it all boils down to it, it's really about violence. And the violence that we're perpetrating towards each other, our government, individuals, on and on. And Sabrina, I would like to ask you, what would you say to someone who's lost someone to violence? And what you've experienced, the personal side to it? Because again, so often it feels like it gets transitioned into a headline or gets turned into a statistic, and we lose sight of what it really means individually, person to person, family to family, as you're saying, the generational impact that this trauma and violence is. What would you say?
One of the things that I would say is, and I try to my best because this is just who I am. I think as mothers, we are fighters. I think we do what we absolutely have to do when it comes to our children. And not even the death of my son will separate me from the love of my son. And one of the things that I want to say is, even though, you know, the name Trayvon Martin is like a name that everybody knows because of the hoodie, he was my baby. He was my son. He was my child. And so there is a deep hurt, there is a deep pain that I will forever live with. And so a lot of times people don't understand this because they're not walking in my shoes. They're not going through this situation. But just imagine your child being 17 years old and being pursued, being profiled, being chased, and murdered. And so a lot of times when I speak, I tell myself that by me speaking to other people and trying to make a difference in helping other people, that this is actually helping me. And I truly believe that. And I won't stop. I won't ever give up.
That's right.
And I always speak to the mothers because you know this feeling. You know this hurt. You know this pain. You know when your son or your daughter walks out the door and you think about it, Lord, please make sure they get back home safely. You've said this to yourself 1,000 times, 100,000 times. And so I'm no differently. The way I feel about my son is no different from anybody else's child. Anybody else's. And so when I look at my son and I look at pictures of my son, I say to myself, this could have been anybody's son. Yes. And so we have to make a difference. You cannot wait until this happens in your household. You cannot. We cannot afford to lose another person. We cannot afford to lose another child, regardless of the color. When I hear things on the TV and I hear something like a 6-year-old drowned in a pool, I can care less what color skin that child has. I know that child is attached to a mother, a father, a family, a sisters, brothers. I know that child is attached to someone. And so my heart goes out to the connecting people, to the connecting bodies. It doesn't matter to me it doesn't matter to me where that child lived. It doesn't matter to me what religion that child is. That doesn't matter. And so we have to look past color. And so one of the things I always say is, I'm not asking you to look to your right and look to your left and love the person that you're sitting next to. I'm not asking you to do that. But what I am saying is we have to respect each other just enough to say to yourself that even though I might not agree with that person's sexual orientation, their education, I might not agree with their point of views, I might not even agree with their political choice, but I have to respect that person as a human being. So a lot of times we get so wrapped up in other things. We get wrapped up in the headlines. We get wrapped up in what's happening in the news. What's the next story? But guess what? All of those stories are attached to a family. All of those stories are attached to someone's broken heart. Now let me tell you what I miss about my son. I have 2 boys. I will always have 2 boys. I have one in heaven and I have one here on earth. And I'm going to continue to fight for my boys. I'm going to continue to love my boys. I'm going to continue to do what I need to do for my boys because it's important. It's important to me. And that's what makes me happy. If you had told me before February 26, 2012, that something would happen to my youngest son, I would have told you that I would have lost my mind because I truly would not have believed that Sabrina Fulton would have been able to pass that hurdle, to get through that storm. I truly do not believe that I would have been strong enough to weather that storm. I know within myself that it was not Sabrina Fulton, that it was God who sits high and looks low. And if I don't have any other hope, my hope and my faith is in God. It's not in man, it's in God. And I had just enough faith to get off the floor from crying, because I cried many nights, many days. And I told myself I was never going to be happy again, because that's what I believed. And when I picked myself up off that floor and I opened my handful of tears, I told myself, you can do better than this. You can do more than this. And I got up from there that day, and I decided that I have to be a spokesperson for people who can't speak. I have to be a spokesperson for the voiceless. My son is not here to speak for himself. I am Trayvon Martin.
I'm jumping around a little bit. I feel like you kind of have to go to Maya Angelou, because there's so many people who are enraged by what is happening to our men and our women, specifically of color, and very much, I'm sure, in the audience, undoubtedly. And I'd love to ask your advice, and I feel like you've already answered this, about how to channel that rage and anger and hurt. But first, I want to read, I don't know if you saw Iconoclast, Dave Chappelle, Maya Angelou. It was pretty awesome. And Dave was asking Maya how, with 8, 9 assassinations she lived through, people who she was friends with, you know, from Malcolm X to Martin Luther King Jr., and how she just wasn't so enraged and angry. And she said, no, well, if you're not angry, you're either a stone or you're too sick to be angry, because you should be angry. Mm-hmm. Now, mind you, there's a difference. You must not be bitter. Now, let me show you why. Bitterness is like cancer. It eats upon the host. It doesn't do anything to the object of its displeasure. So use that anger. Yes, you write it, you paint it, you dance it, you march it, you vote it, you do everything about it, you talk it. Never stop talking it. Do you want to, I know we've spoken about how the trauma affects us in our health, and maybe not holding on to that anger, but channeling it, though, is so powerful. And you talked about the use of art. I wonder if you have any advice on turning pain to power.
Yeah, I mean, so, you know, when you hear Sabrina, as we did for the last 5 or 6 minutes, what I come away with is we can't possibly lose. We can't lose, right? And there is an enormous amount of frustration and rage and anger. But the flip side of that is passion, right? And passion for positive social change, and that's where it comes from. Right? And so for me, I'd love to see us, if we could figure out a way to bottle that passion we just heard and create sort of a, you know, how would we know that we were winning the battle for social justice? How would we know? What would be different, right? How might we be standing here 5 years from now, 8 years from now, 12 years from now, and celebrating, what would we celebrate, right? And so, for me, dismantle the prison pipeline. Just dismantle it. Not cut back, not cut it down, not reduce a little bit, but dismantle the school to prison, cradle to prison, the wolf, the beast, the incarceration superhighway. There's a lot of names for it. We got to send it back to where it came from, right? And replace it with, instead of a punishment culture, an investment culture, a prevention culture, and move money from, we're going to spend over 10 years as a foundation, as a private foundation. We're a big foundation. We're going to spend $1 billion over 10 years, okay? That's about 8% of the prison budget this year, okay, in the state of California, all right? So we need to move those dollars into schools and prevention, number one. Number two, we need to see substantive, meaningful, lasting justice reform and police reform, right? We need to see dignity and professionalism. We need to make sure that the kind of profiling culture that we now have, that took a Trayvon Martin away from us, that we replace that with a different kind of culture, right? So that needs to change. Thirdly, we need to make sure that young people in schools, as we get rid of 3 strikes and you're out and that culture, in schools we need to replace the zero tolerance culture. Because they said it was zero tolerance for the behavior. That's not what has happened. It's zero tolerance for the child. And these young people are telling us the quickest way you want to send me to prison is to stigmatize me in school. Okay? The data shows that. The data shows if you're an African-American male in the state of California, if you drop out of high school, you have an 80% chance of going to prison. Okay? We need to fix that. Right? And then lastly, we need to make sure that everyone who is hurting on the oppression scale, the undocumented and the dreamers, we need to get them in the system and in this country and with a sense of dignity. We need to make sure that LGBT folks who are struggling for just sort of basic civil rights, the kind of stuff that happened in Indiana that they're trying to backtrack from, we need to make sure that we send that back to wherever that came from and never see that kind of thing again. So, we have a lot of work to do, but I have, and we have an enormous amount of faith in what these young people are showing us and teaching us, using social media, using the arts, using spoken word. My wife and I went to see John Legend at the Hollywood Bowl this past summer, and he did a tribute to Marvin Gaye. And it was incredibly powerful because you could hear in Marvin Gaye's lyrics that the work's not finished, right? Marvin Gaye was talking about this and police brutality. How long ago was that, Martin? You remember? 40 years ago, right? And that work's not done. And every time he played a Marvin Gaye song, he had a young person come up and give their spoken word rendition of what Marvin Gaye was saying. So that kind of intergenerational. So there's a scorecard. We need to put some points on the board around social justice. Some things need to change. We know what they are. And if we come together using that kind of bottled passion that we just heard from Sabrina Fulton, I don't know how we can possibly lose. But we do have to get not just angry. We have to get smart, and we have to get strategic, and we have to bring coalitions together, and I think that's the kind of work that you're leading, Rosario, with Voto Latino. Maybe your next thing is to turn Voto Latino into Voto Everybody. I don't know, but that's the kind of coming together that we need.
That's why we were very excited to help co-found National Voter Registration Day. We were able to bring in thousands, actually, of different organizations to come together so we could all push forward the agenda of getting our people enfranchised across the nation. Don't get me started on voter ID laws. I mean, it's like Dr. Andrew Young, who's Martin Luther King Jr.'s right-hand man and mayor of Atlanta, which was named 13 for child sex trafficking and city in the world, shows how far we still have to come. You know, I love that you talked about Marvin Gaye because, you know, we have our leaders. We've had them. And through social media and activism and through intergenerational conversation, we're able to revisit them. We don't need a person anymore. It doesn't require that. The statistics are in, we've got the information. We can all just start voting. We can all just start mobilizing. We can all just start organizing. And to show the power of that, look at Egypt. A lot of people want to make it less complex than what it is and say, oh, it was Facebook. No. It was called decades of dictatorship, and then he couldn't give them bread. And when people couldn't eat, suddenly they couldn't, you know, because we are resilient. We show our resilience every day. It's not like the statistics didn't come in and the polls get taken and people go, yeah, I've always thought violence was just this bad. Or actually, I think it's getting worse. But it's kind of even. People feel scared. Women feel scared to walk down the street. And it's not because the majority of people are attacking each other, but because the minority seems to get all the press. And it's really time for us to start recognizing that, you know, we were able to have the civil rights movement because young people were the ones who said, I'm not afraid of getting arrested in jail and go to jail, so I'm a part of this conversation. I matter. It's going and recognizing the different things that are coming across, like the ACLU creating an app called California Justice, where you can immediately start recording. If you see something that's going on, if they take your phone away, who cares? It's already sent. Because it's not fair to say if you see something, say something unless it's us. I just want to say, you know, there's a lot of young people out there who are feeling a lot of frustrations. They're getting cut out. They're being told that they're apathetic, that they don't care, that they don't have, that voting doesn't matter. That up to the age of 18, they don't need an ID to travel, and which promotes sex trafficking. And so it shows that we're not really addressing the issues that we could be, but watching instead our leadership almost shut down our government over Planned Parenthood. It's never bode well for us as a society to separate ourselves in our issues. So LGBT, young, old, poor, black, white, brown, it's never bode well for our humanity to ever separate each other from each other. And I think young people are really the remarkable, right now, particularly because millennials and the indigo children and everyone beyond them are the most accepting generation we've ever had. And I say accepting is a really important word for me because I really dislike the word tolerance. I barely tolerate the word tolerance. I don't need you to tolerate me. And I think that's a really profound thing, is how young people are really embracing that and living that and expecting that. I wonder what conversations you think we should be having with our youth.
I think that was one of the other questions.
Yes? Yes.
Yeah.
I did.
With our young people, we need to make sure that they're staying in school. It was a time before where if they had a high school diploma, that was something to be celebrated. But as we know, we have to move to the next step, that they can't just graduate high school. They have to move to the next step, which is also graduate college. Yeah, and so we have to make sure that our young people are not only graduating from high school, that they're going through college and everything, and that they're taking some type of internship and that they're getting the experience that they need. But they also need to make sure that they're staying involved with the community, that they're staying involved in these issues. Because what we're doing now is we're setting the stage to turn the world over to them, to turn the communities over to them. And we know that it's in a terrible shape right now. And so we need to do our best to try to straighten up what we've broken, because we've actually broken the system. We contribute to it, whether we did something hands-on or indirectly by not doing anything at all. And so those are, you know, mistakes we made by commission and omission. And so we have to make sure that we try to right the wrong that we've caused. And if it's something that you've done or something that you've said, you need to make sure you correct that, because we cannot turn this world, this society over to them in the condition that it is now. And so our young people deserve better. So we have to do better as adults to try to make sure that we make these communities better, that we try harder, that we do a little bit, just the next step, so that we can improve on the condition. One of the things that, and I hate to say it because it always bothers me, but it's a part of my healing. And so you guys are participating in my healing, okay? And so one of the things that, conversations that people ask all the time is, what do we tell our young people, and how do we continue to motivate them, and how do we continue to make them see a better place in all this darkness? And that's one of the things we have to do, is make sure that they know their history. They know that there were some things that had been done to African Americans, and it cannot go away. It will not go away. And what's happening right now in Baltimore is going to happen in another city. It's going to happen in another city. And so the powers that be need to make sure that they're not just turning the other cheek and saying, okay, this happened here, this is an isolated incident, but by them seeing what's going on firsthand, and the National Guard's coming out and seeing all of these families and all of these, I mean, everybody can't be a liar. And so I absolutely think that when there's a loss of life and you cannot get to the bottom of why that person was killed or murdered, then there needs to be a thorough investigation. We have to hold everybody accountable. You can't pick and choose what laws apply to certain people and then decide to let this person walk away scot-free as if nothing happened. You know, we need to make sure that we are speaking up and that we're speaking out. And I'm all for protests. I'm all for rallies. But I'm not going to tear down my community. I'm not going to tear down your community. I'm not going to stand with you to tear down your community. There's a fight, there's a place and a position in this for everybody. We have our radicals. We have our people that's going to throw rocks, and we're going to have our people that start fires. You're going to have those. They're everywhere. They're all colors and all nationalities. They're not just African Americans, because I watch the news just like you watch the news. Okay? But when you know, it's some name calling that I don't appreciate. It's some terms that's being used when it's African Americans that I don't appreciate. And so we have to get away from the name calling, for one. We have to get away from that. You can't continue to call names. It's a little bit childish. We have to stand up and say, listen, no more name calling. Okay, those are peaceful protesters and unpeaceful protesters. But I'm not going to name call, because it doesn't hurt either side. And then when you apologize for something that you've done, it does not help. Let me just give an example. My son was profiled. He was chased, he was pursued, he was followed at 17 years old, right? The person that murdered my son apologized to me and my family. Do you think that that helped any? It did not. It did not. And so sometimes when you say things and sometimes when you do things, you cannot take them back. So a lot of times we have to make calculated decisions. And some of the things that we can tell our young people is about voting, which is very important. Dr. King was fighting for our right to even vote. So now we have the right and we're abusing it. Come on. Not only is it important that you are a registered voter, but you have to get out and vote, even in the small elections. And then to make it more similar to my case, not only do you need to get out and vote, but when you get that ugly paper in the mail that says that you've been summoned for jury duty, we need you. We need you. And so I'm not going to put a cigarette in my mouth and then tell my kids not to smoke. So we have to lead by example. We have to start doing the things that we want our children to do, and they will model what you do. And it starts at home. It starts at home. So I want to just say to all mothers, and yes, guys, I'm talking to the mothers. I know y'all get on me all the time about, oh, it's not just women. I'm talking to the moms because they know my heart, and I know their heart. And so it's easier for me to talk to the mothers. It's easier for me to talk to the women because they know. And we know how hard we hurt and how hard we love, and it's hard to bounce back from that. And then I'm going to say one more thing about a program that I have with the Trayvon Martin Foundation. It's called the Circle of Mothers. And it's an organization that you do not want to be a part of. It's an organization where we try to uplift each other. It's an organization where we are in the same room, mothers that are victims or have children that are victims of senseless gun violence. You've had a child that was killed. And we come together and we try to uplift each other. We try to heal each other. We try to restore each other. And what I just told the Gray family back in Baltimore, I told his mother, just something very simply. I told her to just make sure she's taking care of herself. That she's doing simple things like making sure that she's eating something and making sure that she's resting and making sure that she's surrounding herself with positive and praying people. Because one thing I've learned is when all the cameras are gone and all the lights go off and you're there at home by yourself, missing your child, and you have no one, you have to look within and you have to pull yourself out of the slump. And I pulled myself out of the slump by meditating day in and day out on Proverbs 3, 5, and 6 that says, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not unto your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him and he shall direct your path. So it wasn't for me to understand, even though my mission was about Trayvon Martin. Don't get me wrong. That's any mom. They're going to fight for their child. My mission initially was about my child. It was about my son. That's what brought the fight out in me. When I finished grieving, I was angry. I wanted to fight. Not physically fight, but the fight came out of me. And I needed to do something about it. And so when we're done wiping our tears and we're done having our pity party and feeling sorry for ourselves, not only about a loss of a child, but maybe you lost a job. Maybe you lost a husband. Maybe you just lost something in your life. Maybe you're battling with an illness or something. You have to come back from that. And you can. And I believe that. And you have to believe it as well. So while we're encouraging our children, sometimes it takes us to encourage ourselves. And that's what I did. I encouraged myself because I believe that this world could be a better place. No, I forgot.
Yes.
That's resiliency.
Yes, it is.
That is the embodiment of taking trauma and tragedy and oppression, and through resiliency, channeling that into transformative leadership. That's how we're going to get there. Thank you, Sabrina.
Thank you.
Hi. First of all, I think I speak on behalf of everyone when I say what an honor it is just to be in your strength and under this manifest justice. The theme of this event is to manifest justice, and through you we can do that because you have inspired us. Today, Trayvon and I would be the same age. I look a little older. We grew up 20 minutes down the street, actually. I live down the street from you. The night that Trayvon died, I was wearing a hoodie, and I made it out of Florida, and he never did. And so for me, Trayvon has always been a person, because when I looked in the mirror, I saw him. But to so many other people, he was the face of a movement, right? That's what Trayvon was. But to you, he's your son. And so I would love to hear, there's so many questions we could ask, but I just really want to know, what's one thing about Trayvon, the person, that no one knows? And it sounds good. I'm excited.
That's easy. That's easy. I mean, you know, it's a few things that makes me smile, and when I think about my son, I certainly smile. But one of the things that I just remember was he was very affectionate. He used to love to hug. He was a teenager, but he never grew out of that. He never grew to the point that he felt like he couldn't show his mother love. And so I pretended a lot of times like I couldn't do things like carry the grocery and do things. And what he would do is he would grab the bags and say, "I got it, Cupcake." And so that's where that name came from. But I miss him so much because he did so much. Like at an early age, he had like his own personality, you know. And although I have the two boys, my oldest son, Javaris, which I'm very proud of, he graduated December the 14th. And, you know, I'm very proud of him. But they are so different. Javaris is an inside guy. Trayvon was an outside guy. You know, he liked it, all sports outside. Football, baseball, everything outside. And Javaris is like an inside guy. And then Javaris might have about 5 friends. Trayvon had like hundreds of friends. Everybody was his friend, you know. And so I just miss him so much. I just think about him all the time, and I miss him so much. And I'm like, I think to myself when this first happened, I said, he had just turned 17 3 weeks before he was murdered. And I always tell myself, his birthday is February 5th. I always tell myself that, I said, how is he going to get along in heaven without me? How is, you know, because you just think in your mind that all kids need their mom, you know. And so I always think, but then when I think about him, it's like, he's helping my grandmother, he's helping my aunts and cousins and everything. And so I'm like, I really just think about him.
Well, I think that I wish he was here to hug you, but I would love to hug you on behalf of all these people.
I want to say thank you to you both for such a remarkable conversation, a profound conversation. Thank you for being here. I remember, in closing I'll say, I remember, I want to say a few things. So I'm going to say a few things first. One, I want to say, you know, you brought up stories and how important stories are. One of the things I really loved about, there was a moment in Selma that I really loved where they were talking about how our story of slavery has been so hijacked from us, and that has become our story. And that's not our story, especially the way that it's promoted and talked about. You know, we come from greatness. You know, the best were chosen, and only the best survived. And it's the best that created this nation. And we shouldn't look at it always with such sorrow and such angst, but actually with a lot of pride in recognizing what we have contributed to this country. And in so many others, our Muslim Americans, our Arab brothers and sisters, you know, we had our Japanese internment camps. We are not seeing this prejudice and what we're pushing back against in immigration this isn't the first time. So recognizing and looking at our history, and really also not just the things to be proud of, but also the things to go, wait, not again. You know, I remember Eva Longoria talking about with the civil rights discrimination that's going on now with LGBT, but specifically she was talking about Latinos. She goes, it's just our time. And I say no to that, because we've learned from this, our past. And we recognize that's why VAWA didn't almost repass again the Violence Against Women Act, because they wanted to include Native Indian women. Who could possibly say, no, I don't want to pass a Violence Against Women Act because I don't want it to include also Native Indian women? Until we recognize the genocide in our own land, we're never going to heal. And until we start participating, because you've also talked about voting, until we start participating and utilizing what so many before us have struggled for, from the suffragette movement to Martin Luther King, so many people who gave us this right, until we are utilizing it to its fullest capacity, the thing that people are still trying to take away from us, don't get it twisted. They wouldn't be fighting so hard to take it away if it wasn't valuable. It is the great equalizer. Young, old, brown, black, brown, poor, rich, each of our votes matter. They say in Katrina why they were ignored for so long is they didn't vote. Ferguson, they didn't vote. Let's not let that be anyone's excuse anymore. I will end with something, a positive note. There's a really amazing program here called the Summer Night Lights program. I became aware of it during Villaraigosa's, when Villaraigosa was mayor, but it started actually with Garcetti before that. Villaraigosa had actually renamed it to the Summer Night Lights program. Because I want to say there's, you know, you talked about social media, and one of the things that we got when we did our task force reach out was that we want to use social media to reach out to our police force. We want more police officers to be a part of our community if they're working and serving in our community. We want them to have higher education. We want them to have cultural sensitivities and diverse sensitivities. And we want them to participate with us. And one of the ways that's been working really beautifully is the Summer Night Lights program, where we actually utilize the parks that are otherwise empty for fear of violence. We create ceasefires, and we do very much like what is happening here at Manifest Justice. We create havens for people, we give food to people, we get them health access and information, all types of things. It dropped down violence in the community by 15%. In those few days that the program existed. That's huge. It takes about $1 million to go through an entire process of a gang-related homicide from beginning to end. It cost $1 million for the entire program for the whole summer. And it invests in our community rather than divests. It's really powerful. And I want to say that because I want us to start paying attention to the powerful things that we could be doing to make the critical changes that we are existing in. And I'll end with something I heard about Chelsea Clinton. She had been reading her father's book, and it had never occurred to her that her dad was growing up in Arkansas during a time where people had to have separate drinking fountains and during segregation. Just didn't really compute to her until she read the book. And when she read it, she said, wow, Dad, that's crazy. I can't even imagine what that must have been like, having white water fountains and bathrooms segregated like that. Wow. What did you do about it? So know that is going to be the question you will be hearing in the years to come as we are talking about voter ID laws, sexual trafficking, immigration, racial profiling, violence with police. We're gonna look back at this moment and hopefully be able to tell our young people, this is what I did. We ended it. You are all a part of that by just being here. I know the doors are gonna open and we're gonna, the ripple of passion and activism and strength is going to smack people in the face. And I'm grateful for that. We have some announcements that are gonna come on after here, but I just wanna say thank you so much. I was really grateful to be here. Really amazing, everything that you shared, and wonderful to meet you, my love.
Thank you, Rosario.